Go ahead and get started. So what we're going to do today is a quick overview about this campaign, how we sort of came up with it, a little bit of background about who we are as an organization, and then what the opportunities are for higher ed. And then we'll kind of practice a little bit. We'll jump into answering some of the questions that are on the guide and engaging in the conversation. So I am going to share my screen. And we're good. Everyone can see it. Fantastic. Living Room Conversation started in 2010 with the idea that in order to address the issues that face us, we need to be in better relationship with each other. And so we took best practices from family mediation and dialogue to create a format that could be free, massively scalable, and accessible. So effectively offering the power of dialogue to the masses. That was the goal. In addition to reaching the masses with our library of conversation guides, however, we do deeper work with local leaders of faith communities, libraries, civic groups, and higher ed institutions. And it's this part of our work that really inspired the Trust in Elections campaign. So the statistics on the left represent the prevailing national narrative around the elections, that we're deeply divided, that we can't or shouldn't trust the other side, and that the elections aren't trustworthy. And no matter who wins, whether it's Trump or Biden, clearly large numbers of the American people will feel like democracy is broken. And as higher ed institutions, and one of the places where democracy is taught, embodied, students have kind of their first experiences at participating in democracy and voting. It's a critical issue, and I'm sure you're all feeling that as well. The quote here is from one of our higher ed community leaders, who, in addition to the work that she does on campuses, has also been a longtime election official. And this is kind of what we're feeling is this, and hearing from people, is not only kind of fear around whether the election results will be accepted or they'll be administered in a safe way. There's this kind of personal safety that's coming through. So while all of this is happening, we also have the opportunity this year to lean into showcasing what bridging divides work can look like, and how tools like dialogue can help to start foster trust and bring down sort of the tension that comes when we start to distrust our institutions as well as each other, and really kind of lean into that demonizing each other a little bit. So there are things that we can do. We can take what we know about people wanting elections to be fair and transparent and safe and offer a way to engage. We can leverage the fact that elections happen in local communities where local leaders have local power and influence and connections and relationships to start challenging the national narrative by sharing their own local narrative. So by having these conversations and talking about that. And then we can invest in the capacity of communities to build both interpersonal trust and awareness or trust in the election process, and then tell that story as sort of a counter to what we're seeing in the news. And so our plan is essentially to take what we know, to leverage what we know about our model and its effectiveness, and then to equip communities with a way to engage. So we had an 8-month research study sponsored by Fetzer Institute on our model, and that found that both in-person and online conversations have certain immediate longer-term impacts, as well as what happens when communities lean in and do these conversations. So the ones that are particularly interesting, I think, for the idea of trust in elections is participants learn something every time just by sharing from their experiences. They approach conversations with a learning mindset. They start to apply the tools to other parts of their lives and have an increased interest in systemic change that comes from this idea of humanizing each other. And then in communities, it can generate a baseline of trust, as well as foster this culture of listening and respect and friendship that enables people to then more cooperatively problem solve and work together. So we will be investing in local communities by having a local living room conversations on trust and elections. And then as those communities start having that conversation, we'll connect them to have a national conversation. And so then they're able to see, it's not just here in Ohio or Florida that we're having the conversations, it's also in Michigan, Maine, and Texas. And so trying to kind of point to this more, this larger effort toward investing in conversations. What we're asking community leaders like you to do is to work and find, within your framework, so within campus, finding a way to organize a trust and elections conversation, whether it's student-led, whether it's within your classroom, whether it's a campus-wide effort. We have additional resources like our trust and elections toolbox that can help you in organizing and orchestrating the conversation. And then we're also convening a learning community. So once you've had the conversation, you can opt into this learning community where you can see what other higher ed practitioners are doing or other community leaders are doing, the challenges, the successes, what they're doing as a follow-up to the conversation. And then we're also, throughout all of this, we have a research project. Oops, that went the wrong way. A research project that I'll describe in a little bit to really measure the impact of what we're doing and these conversations. So I just want to paint a little bit of a picture of what a living room conversations look like in case you've never experienced it or participated in one. These happen, the ideal group size is 4 to 6 individuals in a conversation. So whether you have one small group conversation like the picture above, or you have 150 people in the room like the picture below, you're still in these intimate conversations. And the feeling of a living room conversation, we use the term host rather than facilitator or moderator. So we are essentially saying, I'm inviting you into my living room and I want all of my guests to feel welcome. And that's my role as the host of a conversation. We have 6 conversation agreements. The first one is here, be curious and listen to understand. And we use the language of agreement rather than ground rules. So again, we're kind of reinforcing this idea that we're all contributing to the conversation and we're all responsible for the conversation together. The host also participates in the conversation, which is relatively unique among dialogue models as well. And so we have these things like show respect and suspend judgment, be authentic and welcome them to others. But we also include a description. So instead of just saying, be curious and listen to understand, we then give people a little bit of a pause to say, what does that actually look like? So conversation is as much about listening as it is about talking. You might enjoy exploring how others' experiences have shaped their values and perspectives. So we give them a little bit more to contextualize it, because not only do these agreements create the container for the conversation, but they are also the skills that you'll be practicing during the conversation. And so whether it's students that you work with or faculty and staff or just yourselves, the format and structure of the conversation allows people to really practice good dialogue, good listening, curiosity, empathy, all of these sort of core bridge building skills. And then there are 3 different rounds of questions. So the first one taps into our shared values. Research shows that when we connect across shared values, we humanize each other more readily. And then that can kind of lay a little bit of a foundation before we get into the topic questions. An example of topic question is, how do you define trust in elections and have you experienced it over time? So we're asking people to really tap into their lived experience rather than their opinion. Debate is wonderful, opinions are wonderful, and we need them. But when we're really trying to create and foster trust and connection and understanding, we want to stay in the space of more of what does this look like in your life, or what experience have informed the way that you feel around a specific issue. And then we have reflection questions. Here again, we've strategically kind of target people who are more action oriented. Is there a next step you want to take? People who want to think about, oh, has there been a perception shift that you've had, or how do you feel? What is your biggest takeaway? So kind of thoughts, feelings, and action are all some of the reflection questions that we have. I'm going to pause there because I feel like I'm just talking a lot. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. I know I'm going kind of fast. I want to get to us actually experiencing a conversation, but I'm happy to answer any questions about the structure or format or what went into creating the guides themselves as well. The research project that we're doing, we were awarded the Democracy Renewal grant through Public Agenda, and we're working with 2 different researchers who are conducting national surveys in June, July, and August around kind of understanding how people felt about the last presidential election, how much trust they have in the current election system. And then we're testing for some of these social cohesion impact measures, like self-efficacy. How much do you feel like you can impact your community? How much sense of belonging do you feel within your own community? Intellectual humility, intergroup empathy, and then generalized and political trust. So if you're not familiar with the social cohesion impact measure, I might just spend a minute there because it's a fantastic tool that you can be utilizing in any of your democracy or bridge building work that you might do. It was developed by the Bridging Movement Alignment Council, and it's free to use. You set up a consultation call with them. They use a pre-post survey on a Google form, and then all of the data is automatically visualized, so you can see how much impact you've had on the different metrics that you choose. So they have sort of a menu of things you can test for, and you choose at least 3 of them, and they set it all up for you. So if that's a tool that you might be interested in, they are happy to kind of help you set that up. On campus, there are a couple opportunities. Again, I mentioned how the conversation agreements lend themselves really well to acquiring skills. And so we've seen a lot of people on campuses. Yes, it's the social cohesion impact measure. So it's right here, it's this 3rd bullet. And then I will also put in the chat the Bridging Movement Alignment Council, where you can kind of find it. And I can even drop a link specifically to the tool. I see a question about the Braver Angels and other sessions on election integrity. I think that we see ourselves as sort of an on-ramp into some of these deeper interventions. So our model can be self-facilitated. It's completely, the structure is already there. We have research that backs the structure, and it's a really easy to use first step. And what it does is it helps people who participate in these conversations feel more connected. They learn something about themselves as well as their participants. And so it creates this relationship that then you can build on for other things. We presented to the Braver Angels Field Leader Network about this campaign last month. And one of the things they mentioned was a lot of times we don't have those relationships that are always built into the coalitions, or chapters are all really different. And so this is a tool that we could use on relationship building. And that's really where this model shines. It's relationship building, it's trust building, and then you're contextualizing all of the issues in lived human experience that then you can build on for consensus building, to choose projects. More deliberative processes are kind of add-ons to our model. On campuses, having students lead the conversations, it works well in student clubs. We've had people do that. Doing it within your own classroom, and then more campus-wide conversations. So we've had a lot of campuses use that model as well, where a department or 2 departments will kind of join forces and offer a campus-wide conversation. Because the model can be self-facilitated, you can just have conversation guides at each of those small tables or in those small groups, and students can lead them themselves. This, however interesting it is our timeline and kind of where we are. So we really see September as being the time to have a rollout of youth-led campus conversations where we can really be engaging students as they come back to campus. There have been, I'm sure as all of you have experienced, some turbulent times on campuses. And now in this kind of break, there are ways that campuses can invest in what are we going to do when students come back to campus. And this is one of those things that can bring students together and then also be a really easy add-on to some of the voter education and engagement efforts that happen on campuses. And then really quickly, how we're collaborating. In the chat, you mentioned some other models. We're partnering with Braver Angels and Interfaith America. We're looking at who else has resources in this space because wide-scale change really requires more collective and collaborative efforts. And so we see ourselves as one piece of this larger puzzle. And there are other people who have other pieces to help to build and foster trust in elections. We've worked with the networks like Campus Compact that we're associated with and partner with to provide this opportunity to different community leaders. And we do have, with this research grant, we received some funding. So we have limited funding to support people who are organizing these conversations. And we have $10 gift cards for any conversation participant. So if you invited students to be part of a conversation, like we do have that, it's built into the pre and post survey. So everyone that completes a pre and a post survey, then will get a $10 gift card. So I am going to pause briefly before we jump into the conversation and just see if there are any questions. I can be looking at chat or if people have a question. I haven't worked with Bill Doherty, but I've worked with a lot of other people at the organization, but not with him specifically. And Braver Angels is part of our Bridging Movement Alignment Steering Committee. So John Wood Jr. and Monica Guzman both sit on that committee with me, and Elizabeth Dahl and others have participated in collaborative and collective efforts.
Becca,
Yeah.
I've received one question about wanting to see if your slides will be available
Yes.
after the session.
Yes. I'm happy to make
Okay.
it available.
I thought that was probably the case, but I wanted to confirm. So I just also wanted to vocalize that for anybody else that may have been wondering.
Yes. I should have started with that. We also have one-pagers, and we have the Trust in Elections webpage that has more information as well. And I can make sure that you get those links also. Any other questions specifically about the campaign? And then you may have more questions after we kind of participate in a mini living room conversation as well.
Is it okay to ask one live, or do we need to
Yeah,
type
of
in the
course.
chat?
No, that's fine.
Thank you, Becca. I think one of the big questions that I have right now in my mind when I'm thinking about group conversations, as small as you kind of mentioned at first, is how would this play out for kind of like a very neurodiverse student body population?
Mhm.
And was just welcoming some ideas. I've been doing some reading about how to create an environment that's kind of welcoming to a very diverse group of students, and that's one that really comes to mind. So just wondering what some thoughts are, or guidance that you have about how this living room conversation would work with our neurodiversity of our student population.
That's a great question. We did a big project through the public health department at Brigham Young University, where students got to choose, like, what are the conversations that we've been avoiding on campus and what conversations should we be having? And mental health, public health, and then race and faith communities were the three that they went with. But we did the largest conversation we did was on mental health, and they partnered with the neurodiversity club on campus as one of their partners, and they brought, just something as simple as bringing fidget things for each table so that people could be playing with Play-Doh while they're having the conversation, or keeping their hands active as one way. And so I I would recommend something like that if you already have students who are taking a leadership role in that, to ask them how they think it could what could be done during the conversation. Other than that, the format is we'll kind of see it, it's both structured and loose. So we have kind of timed portions where we'll say, all right, we're going to go around the circle. You can pass if you don't want to speak, like, and we'll come back around to you, but we'll have about 2 minutes to answer one of these questions. And then as the time comes up, we'll kind of give everyone a wrap it up so that everyone knows that they have their own specific time to be able to share, which can be helpful for people who maybe are more hesitant to speak up in a group. Um, and then we'll have sort of where it's opened up and we invite anyone to kind of explore what you heard from others if you have follow-up questions. And then the role of the host is really to kind of open as many doors to communication as possible. And so, you know, inviting people to step up or step back, just checking in. I haven't heard from you in a while. No need to contribute, but I just was checking in with you if there was something that you did want to contribute. Um, but I can see there is this timing component throughout, which may land differently depending on the neurodiverse students that you're working with. Um, but I think higher ed specifically has such rich resources of people who are thinking this through. The BYU example is just one of the things that I've seen do, but I thought it was brilliant that they went through the student group, that it was a student-led thing, and then they kind of got support from other clubs on campus. And I would say, the same thing if you're bringing in political groups, or if you're trying to, you know, I think the Black Student Union also was involved in the conversation, like how depending on who you want in the conversation, how you can work within your infrastructure on campuses to give students more of a leadership role, but also involve them in the organizing of the conversation. I don't know if that answered your question or was really helpful. I'm sorry, I don't have more specific things, but
No, thank you. That was super helpful. Just something that we're exploring new, but we know that that is something that is very much present on our student
mhm,
campus. And so just want to make sure that, we're, as we're thinking about this, we're also thinking about making this experience, accessible to all and a good experience, right? And so
mhm.
just wondering how that had worked and what words you could share for that. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. And as far as, sensitivity within the conversation model, um, the questions are all very broad, and you'll kind of see that so that people can bring what they want to the conversation. So, rather than feeling like we're looking for a specific answer or being really leading, we leave it pretty open, and we also allow people to choose between questions. So if there's one that they feel like I don't really have anything to say here, you can have options. So that's what we'll do. I'll show you, you'll have options of a question, and that's how I always host a conversation, is to say choose one of these two questions or one of these three questions to answer. And that way it gives a little bit more flexibility to what seems like a really structured format. All right. We're going to jump right in then to the conversation agreements. I talked about these a little bit. What I would invite you to do whenever I'm hosting a conversation, we usually have people take turns and read them out loud. Um, it helps to kind of hear them in different voices to make it a little bit more sticky. And then I'll always invite people to think about what's a conversation agreement that you maybe want to work on or that you could work on during the conversation we're about to have. What comes really naturally to you? What might be a little bit more of a challenge? So again, it kind of activates a learning mindset and reinforces that this is a practice. We're all practicing. So including me as a host, I'm always practicing these skills. So I'm just going to call random people based on what I see on my screen to sort of read these. If you want to unmute yourself and read them out loud, we'll go Nicole, Gabriella, and Laurel, and then Laura, Andrew, and Jennifer.
Okay. You want me to start with the first one?
Yes, please. Thanks.
All right. Be curious and listen to understand. Conversation is as much about listening as it is about talking. You might enjoy exploring how others' experiences have shaped their values and perspectives.
Show respect and suspend judgment. People tend to judge one another. Setting judgment aside opens you up to learning from others and makes them feel respected and appreciated. Try to truly listen without interruption or crosstalk.
Note any common ground as well as any differences. Look for areas of agreement or shared values that may arise and take an interest in the differing beliefs and opinions of others.
Be authentic and welcome that from others. Share what's important to you. Speak from your experience. Be considerate of others who are doing the same.
Be. Did you still want me to read? Sorry. Thanks. Be purposeful and to the point. Do your best to keep your comments concise and relevant to the question you are answering. Be conscious of sharing airtime with other participants.
Own and guide the conversation. Take responsibility for the quality of your participation and the conversation as a whole. Be proactive in getting yourself and others back on track if needed. Use an agreed upon signal like the timeout sign if you feel the agreements are not being honored.
I think you're muted.
I am muted. These are the container for the conversation as well as what people will be actively practicing. If I were to do this on campus, I might even have people write down or at least think of in their minds what's an agreement that you want to work on during the conversation. So I will invite you to do the same thing. Think of one that you'd like to work on during our really mini conversation. And then I always highlight ones that I struggle with. For me, it's be purposeful and to the point all the time. Like I always, but it's something that I try to work on. And then the other one that I will often highlight because I see a lot of people who struggle with it and who say that this is one of the really important ones is the showing respect and suspend judgment. And I think it's important to normalize the judgment. So judgment comes up whether we want it to or not. But something you could do during this conversation is maybe jot down when it does come up. And then you can revisit it after the conversation. Or when you open the conversation up, you could say something like, Laura, when you said that, I just made this assumption, or I just had this reaction and I want to check it with you. And so I think those two specifically can be really good to sort of draw out for folks in a conversation. Either because they're not sure how to deal with the judgment that they have, and that just happens naturally. And then the being purposeful and to the point is something I think many people struggle with during a conversation. So Laura, I think, is going to help me put you into breakout rooms so that we can have a conversation. Choose someone to be the host and the timekeeper. So I just use my cell phone and I will set my stopwatch for 2 minutes. And then as we come up to the 2 minutes, I'll ask people to wrap it up. So just remind them to wrap it up in a really nice way. and then you move on to the next person. So you'll have 1 minute to introduce yourselves. So your name, where you're from, and something you love about your community. And then you'll each have 2 minutes to answer one of the questions here on the right. And you're going to answer them without interruption. So if Ben, Scarlett, and Sophia were all in a conversation, Ben would answer his questions, Scarlett would answer hers, and then Sophia would answer hers. After everyone's had a chance to answer, then you kind of open it up. You can jot down notes, questions, or follow-up, things that sparked new thinking for you, and then just have sort of an open conversation. And then we'll come back together.
How many people do we want per room?
Let me see. How many people do we have total?
We have 23 total people. So do we want like rooms of 4?
Yeah, I would do rooms of 4 would be great. And then I am going to stop sharing this really quick so that I can get these instructions into the chat and you can take them with you, which is always helpful.
How much time do we want for folks to be in the room?
So if there are 4 people, it's 4 minutes for introductions, and then 8 minutes to answer a question, and then about 5 minutes, like 15 minutes.
Perfect.
Should be good. And then let me grab these questions really quickly so I can get them in here. In the chat.
I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to let you get those in the chat, and then I will open the rooms.
Okay, perfect.
Because then the questions will go with everyone.
Yes. And you do not have to answer the same question. All right.
Okay, I'm going to open the rooms.
Perfect. Do you want me to join one of the rooms?
That's up to you.
If there are, if they
There's
need
2 people. There's 2 people in that room.
Okay.
I can also put them in. There's another room that only has 2 people.
Okay.
So it's completely up to you if you want to join it, or
maybe put them with 2 other people. And it looks like there's one with, there are a couple rooms that only have 3 people, so you can pop me in one of the 3 people rooms.
Okay, sounds good. I am going to put you in.
It also looks like Stein Odegaard is in 2 different rooms. I don't know how that's possible, but
Well, they were joined twice.
oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, perfect.
So I just moved it there.
All right. Thanks, Laura.
Yep.
Welcome back, everyone. I would love to take just like a really quick one thing from each breakout room, like if there was a theme or something that came out of each room, and just get a snapshot of what you discussed. Like, do I still have the list of the breakout? Okay, breakout room 1 was Danielle, James, Nicole, and Sophia. Does one of you want to give a quick share out of something that was discussed in your room? Or a takeaway?
I can just start, so it's hard being put on the spot. I would say, for us, I was group 6. Sorry if I cut off group 1. We learned that we're not alone. I don't know if Michael, my roommate, wanted to refer to Zoom, wants to share, but I think that we're not alone in doing this work, and also that there's so much that we can do that still comes at it from a nonpartisan perspective. I don't know about you, Michael.
Yeah, I think we talked about apathy and combating apathy specifically within student populations who feel like maybe their vote isn't going to be effective. But we also talked about how in the roles that we're in right now, we're kind of on the defensive. There's a deliberate offensive attack on democracy right now. These political parties, they have data sets that are mind-blowing. They can see that from their data sets that some of democracy is going to be harder for certain parties going into the future based on demographics. So they're using policy to put locks and chains on our democracy. So we're on the defensive. We need to be really intentional about combating some of these short-term, short-sighted policy moves to limit democracy. And we're hopeful that they are short-sighted and that we will be able to persevere into the future.
We might have time for one more.
I'll jump back in. Group 1 said we
Perfect.
were
Thanks,
not
James.
real quick. We talked about trust and the importance of trust, and that trust is evolving. It's not static, and so something you constantly have to build and work on. And then the second thing, that voting is a piece of the puzzle, and that it's important as we speak to young people, they can see the hypocrisy and some of the challenges that exist in our systems, the system as a whole, and that as we speak to them, to encourage them not only just to vote, but to also be active in other civic ways to make our society better. So that
Thank
quick.
you. And one of the things, if you had these conversations on campus, you would find that each room, there were just different themes that were pulled out. Dialogue is very much a co-creative process. And so what happens with one group of 4 people will be different than what happens with another group of 4 people, because we're pulling from our experience and our thoughts. And so it's always unique. I've had this conversation a lot this year, and I always find some new perspective or some new thing. The other thing that I just want to underscore is one of the questions that we didn't have here, but that's on the guide, is the difference between local and national elections. And the local, people tend to trust that more. You have more visibility and transparency, you know what happens. And so by having these conversations locally, you can build that sort of trust to know, like, oh, I could actually be a poll worker, or I can look up and see what election equipment my precinct is using if I have no idea, or what's going on in the state and what's the Secretary of State doing. And that a lot of times we think of the national, we think of some shadowy force that's swooping in and changing all of the results, or messing with everything. And so we can kind of start with, it really is a place where local leaders and local conversations can have a huge impact, because that's where the elections are administered. And so the other thing that I was thinking is, you mentioned apathy, and I think that there's this balance between apathy and proximity. And this proximity of having this local conversation, of having a local election leader come and speak, of like really being close to it, can help with the apathy as well as with the distrust. And so I am going to, I know we're like super close or at time. I'm going to share my screen quickly one more time. This QR code, which again, you'll get the slide deck, that will take you to a form where if you're interested in trying this conversation out, then you'll get an email and we can kind of help to onboard you. If you want to do it just with yourself and friends this summer, and then think about how it could apply in the fall, then we welcome you to have that as well. We're trying to get as many of these conversations happening, which will help our research as well, but also just to kind of show we're invested in this, and it may give you ideas also for how you can build on this conversation to be part of a larger effort around trust in elections, or to James's point, a larger effort on democracy and strengthening democracy, and that kind of work that you're looking to do on campuses. So thank you all for your time. Thanks, Laura and Campus Compact, for having me. If you have any questions, my email is here as well. I'm happy to answer them. And hopefully we'll hear from some of you or see some of you moving forward.
Thank you, Becca. This was great. And we will be sure to follow up with everybody with the recording and with Becca's slides. So please check out their information. And as someone that has used their resources in the past, they are fantastic. So we will see you all in Compact World next time.